Day is Q is for quiet men. It looks like monster. Some of our best friends are monsters. However, it has been found that the actors who on screen are the most hideous of creatures can in reality be the most pleasant of folk. I can remember 2 or 3, says director Roger Corman, particularly Vincent Price, Boris Karloff, and Peter Lorre, 3 very fine actors who are not with us anymore and who have worked with me in horror films. Born in St. Louis, Missouri, Vincent Price, 1911 to 1993, was one of the screen's more modern masters of the macabre. By the time he appeared in his first genre film, Lon Chaney Sr. had been dead for nearly a decade, and Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi, and Peter Lorre were already established stars. Yet by the standards of today's audience, Price is justly venerated as the cinema's Prince of Peril. His suave, menacing looks and distinctive voice are instantly recognizable, and for more than 5 decades, he was regarded by many as the epitome of the horror film star. Vincent Price was the first I met, recalls Corman. He had started in Hollywood as a young leading man, and then when I met him, he had graduated to a more mature type of character actor. Vincent's public persona was that of very elegant and established, rather formal Hollywood star, but he is also a very funny man and rather cultured in both his knowledge of art and of food. Vincent Price was extremely supportive. He's extremely intelligent and a very cultured man, Barbara Steele. Above, we have Vincent Price, Boris Karloff, Peter Lorre, and Roger Corman of the broad. Oh man, that's a young Roger Corman. That's wild. This right here is a young Roger Corman. I've never seen him that young. And then this opposite page is the selected films of Vincent Price. So obviously it's going to be pretty long. Oh, we have another opposite page of selected films of Boris Karloff. To me, Boris Karloff was not only a great actor, but a dear and longtime friend. What I admired most about him was his enormous gratitude to the public and movie makers who made it possible for him to have such a long and productive career. He often spoke of it with great feeling and always with humor. That humor was, of course, the secret of his charm, humor, and genuine concern for his friends, Vincent Price. I have been more fortunate than some actors who have been in horror films, I know. It is a shame that Boris Karloff was confined to playing one type of role because he was too good an actor, Christopher Lee. And then we have some pictures for Tomb of Phrygia, Black Sabbath, Le Comtesse de la Terreur, Comedy of Terrors, The Raven. Although Vincent led with what might be described as the good life, he was a very dedicated actor and took his art very seriously. Vincent had been trained at London's Royal Academy of Dramatic Art as a classical actor, so he had the formal movements and techniques. But he and I were both looking for what we would call truth in performance. Vincent Price may have been the prince, but Boris Karloff, 1887 to 1969, was the undisputed king of horror. Born William Henry Pratt in Camberwell, London, he used £100 legacy from his mother to sail to Canada in 1909, where he found employment in a variety of jobs. When he applied to join a touring theater company, he remembered a remote family name on his mother's side and adopted Karloff as a stage name. For a first name, he pulled Boris out of the air. By the time he arrived in Los Angeles in 1917, he had established himself as a popular stage villain. Beginning his movie career with appearances in crowd scenes and serials, he slowly began to establish himself and a role in the 1931 gangster thriller, The Criminal Code, led directly to him being cast as the monster in James Whale's classic Frankenstein, 1931. Boris, when transforming himself into a monster, was much more of a formalistic actor using technique, Corman remembers. I would tell him exactly what I wanted and he would play that. Peter Lorre, however, was a entirely different type of actor. If Karloff was king and Price the prince, then Peter Lorre, 1904 to 1964, was the jester among these 3 merchants of Venice. Born Ladislav Lowenstein in Rosahregi, Hungary, he decided to become an actor in the 1920s, joining a performing troupe in Vienna, where he was noticed by director Fritz Lang. In 1930, Lang cast the actor as the child murderer in M, inspired by the exploits of Serial killer Peter Curtin, the notorious vampire of Dusseldorf. Fleeing the rise of Nazism, Laura escaped to France and then to England, where Alfred Hitchcock cast him in The Man Who Knew Too Much, 1934. Accepting a 6-month contract with Columbia, Laura traveled to America the day after completing his work for Hitchcock. He'd been trained in Germany in the 1920s in the German expressionist technique, explains Corman, so that when he came to Hollywood, he could work very well with American method actors and directors. On set, I was more inclined to let him go, to encourage him to improvise, because he could stay with the truth of the scene and at the same time bring some very strange, quirky humor to it. I did work with Peter, Boris, and Vincent together on one film, The Raven, 1963, and it was a wonderfully stimulating experience. We had to play the Raven for laughs, continues Corman, because both Richard Matheson, our writer, and I were getting tired of the stock Poe pictures. In fact, it was his original idea that we should move into comedy. I was only too happy to agree. As it turned out, the film was the most fun I've ever had on a Poe picture. It had the biggest look of them all and up until the time, and certainly was the most colorful, and the sorcerer's duel at the end filled with the lightning bolts and fireballs. But the best part of the movie was being on set and watching everything between the actors. Peter kept everyone on their toes, myself included. He would just begin to improvise unexpectedly. Boris came in with all his lines learned, and he said, Peter gives me replies that are not in the script. What can I do? What I finally came up with, I said, see if you can just modify your lines a little bit to fit what Peter is going to say, which none of us knows in advance. And I kind of think Peter doesn't know either. Vincent would really appreciate the new angles and actually play along with them, but it would drive poor Boris crazy. The two of them, and eventually the three of them, and their scenes worked very well together. At one point, just to show you how this movie evolved, Vincent is talking with Peter, who is dressed in this oversized bird costume. Just the sight of Peter in that suit would be enough to make anyone crack up, but Vincent has to play it straight. Very sadly, he turns to Peter and says, my wife's body is buried in a crypt beneath the house. Peter didn't bat an eye. Where else? He just shrugged. That sort of behavior occurred throughout the shooting. We'll turn back to the quotes. I have selected films of Peter Lorre, selected films of Roger Corman. One always hears of actors complaining of being typed. I was lucky. Whereas bootmakers have to spend millions to establish a trademark, I was handed a trademark free of charge. When an actor gets in position to select his own roles, he's in big trouble, for he never knows what he can do best. Boris Karloff. Peter knew the script, but he declared it null and void and never mentioned it again. Letting the others keep in the text, he kept to the story and for the most part improved it. Vincent Price. I had just had it up to my eyeballs with the heavy torture and burial stuff, so I made it funny. Richard Matheson. So Richard Matheson. The Raven, USA, 1963, director Roger Corman, with Vincent Price, Peter Lorre, Boris Karloff, Hazel Port, Olive Sturgis, Jack Nicholson, American International Pictures, color. After 5 years' absence, Karloff was brought back to the screen by director Corman for this enjoyable romp. Matheson's script has less to do with Poe's atmospheric poem than the 1935 version did, but this tale of rival sorcerers, Dr. Erasmus Kraven and the evil Dr. Scarabeus, benefits for a star cast, including the ad-libbing of Laura as Dr. Bedloe, magically transformed into the foul-tempered bird, a young Nicholson as the bumbling hero, and Port as the lost Lenore. It also features a wonderful climactic duel of magic. It was given an X certificate in Britain. We have some poster art. One of my favorite movies was with Boris Karloff, Peter Lorre, and Basil Rathbone, The Comedy of Terrors. What wonderful fun they all were, and how I missed them all. All of them were highly intelligent, extremely kind, and vastly amusing men. None of them felt other than privileged to have had a faithful public for so many years. Vincent Price. The Comedy of Terrors, USA, 1963, director Jacques Tourneur, with Vincent Price, Boris Karloff, Peter Lorre, Joyce Jameson, Joey Brown, Basil Rathbone, American International Pictures, color. Although not too successful in America and given a belated release in Britain, this fun horror comedy teams three great horror stars under the direction of Val Lewton veteran Tourneur, who does the best he can with an uninspired Richard Matheson script. In a small New England town in the 1890s, the family funeral establishment of Hinchley and Trumbull is beset with financial difficulties. So the unscrupulous Waldo Trumbull, Price, and his assistant Felix Feely, Lorre, set out to create their own clients. Unfortunately, their plans are thwarted by the senile Amos Hitchley, Karloff, and the wealthy Felix F. Black, Rathbone, who refuses to remain dead. Bryce is nicely nasty, and Karloff has an amusing cameo, but the real stars are Rathbone spouting Shakespeare at the most inopportune moments, and Lauren, his last horror role. A masked double is clearly visible in several scenes. Given the talent involved, this should have been much funnier, but it's still quite enjoyable. Although they are no longer with us, Vincent Price, Boris Karloff, and Peter Lorre have left behind them a lasting legacy of movies that are destined to chill and thrill generations to come. According to Roger Corman, a horror actor's job, and I shouldn't use the word horror actor, I should really say an actor who is working in a horror film, just as any actor's job is to deliver truth in a performance. If an actor can do that, I think he is a fine actor in any medium, and particularly fine actor for a horror film. That was cute. Quiet. Next week, we have our practice. Thank you for reading with me. I will see you next week.